The sun was soft that afternoon, not too hot, not too cold, the kind of weather that made the air feel calm and the water shimmer like glass. The man walked slowly down the old gravel path that led to the lake, his fishing gear resting on his shoulder, a small tackle box swinging gently in his hand. His steps were steady, his mind at peace. This was supposed to be a quiet day, a break from the noise of daily life. The lake had always been his place of calm, a space where the birds sang, where the water rippled against the shore, where silence lived between the trees. In his wallet, tucked neatly behind his driver's license, was a small laminated card, a county-issued pass that gave him legal access to the lake. The card was simple but official, stamped with the seal, signed by the clerk, the dates clear and valid. He knew he would never use it unless someone asked. But it was there, always there, proof that his presence was not trespassing, proof that the water and the land around it were open to him. He had carried it for years without ever needing to pull it out. The thought of showing it never crossed his mind, because for him the lake was not a place of conflict, it was a place of peace. As he stepped onto the clearing that opened to the water, he paused for a moment, his eyes softening as he saw the reflection of the trees stretching across the lake, the surface broken only by the occasional splash of a fish below. He set his tackle box down carefully, adjusting his rod, his heart already lighter, the world behind him fading. He crouched down, checking the line, testing the reel, humming softly to himself. The sound of the breeze through the leaves felt like a song. He was just about to cast his line into the water when it came. The sound sharp, harsh, cutting through the calm like a knife, a woman's voice, angry and loud. "What do you think you're doing here?" He froze for a moment, his hand on the reel, his eyes lifting slowly from the water to the path behind him, and there she was, storming down with heavy steps, her sandals slapping the dirt, her arms swinging stiffly at her sides, her face twisted in anger. It was her, the one the neighbors whispered about, the one they called HOA Karen. She moved with the arrogance of someone who believed every inch of the world belonged to her. Her eyes locked on him as though he had already committed a crime, her voice rising again before he could speak. "This is private property. You can't be here. Don't you see the signs?" The man turned fully now, standing slowly, his expression calm, his voice steady. "Good afternoon. I'm just here to fish. I have a pass." But Karen didn't hear him, or maybe she didn't care. She stepped closer, her finger pointing at him like a weapon, her words louder now. "Pass? Don't you lie to me. I know everyone in this community, and I've never seen you before. You don't belong here, you're trespassing." The man didn't move, he didn't raise his voice, he only stood straight, his rod still in his hand, his eyes meeting hers, calm against her fury. He repeated quietly, "I have a pass." Karen laughed bitterly, shaking her head, her voice dripping with mockery. "A pass? Do you think you can fool me with some fake piece of paper? I'm the president of the HOA, I know who's allowed here and who isn't, and you are not." Her words carried across the water, loud enough that a few people walking the far trail turned their heads. The man could feel their eyes, their curiosity. The silence of the lake now broken by tension. Karen folded her arms, her chin lifting, her stance bold. "You need to leave right now before I call the police." The man breathed slowly, steadying himself. He didn't like conflict, he didn't like raising his voice, but he knew this woman's type, the kind that thrived on power, the kind that grew louder the more you stayed calm. Still he chose patience. "I respect the rules. I wouldn't come here without the right to. I carry a county pass. I'm allowed on this lake." Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips curling. "County pass? Don't make me laugh. This is HOA land, and I decide who stays and who goes, and right now I say you go." She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers flying across the screen, her voice sharp. "You've got 5 seconds to leave before I make this official." The man stood his ground, his jaw tightening, his hand brushing lightly against his wallet where the card rested. He didn't pull it out yet. Not now, not when her voice was still so full of fire. He knew showing it too early would mean nothing. She wouldn't see it, wouldn't accept it. She would only call it fake. No, not yet. Not until it mattered. Karen held her phone up, her thumb hovering. "Last chance. You can walk away now and avoid embarrassment, or I'll have the police deal with you." The man said nothing, only turned his eyes back to the water for a moment, the silence between them stretching long, the lake no longer calm but heavy with suspense. The neighbors on the far trail had stopped walking, their figures frozen. Waiting, watching, the man finally turned back to her, his voice quiet but firm. Do what you think is right. Karen's face flushed red, her eyes blazing. She pressed the phone to her ear, her words sharp and clipped. Yes, police? I need an officer right away. There's a trespasser at the lake. Yes, right now. His refusing to leave. The man watched her, his expression unreadable, the calm in his body hiding the storm inside. He could feel the shift in the air, the hook of the story tightening, the peaceful day gone, replaced by the sharp edge of conflict, the woman pacing, her voice carrying, her eyes shooting daggers at him as though she had already won. But deep in his pocket, the cards still waited, silent, powerful. The truth she didn't expect, the truth that would soon freeze her where she stood. Karen lowered her phone slowly, the call made, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. She turned her eyes back on the man like a predator circling prey, her tone dripping with authority. The police are on their way, and when they get here, you'll have a lot of explaining to do. Her words were sharp enough to echo off the still water. The man stood quietly, his rod still in his hand, his tackle box at his feet, his posture steady. He didn't argue, didn't shout back, and somehow that calmness only made Karen angrier. She stepped closer, her sandals crunching on the gravel, her finger stabbing the air at him. You think you can just walk in here with your little bag and rod and act like this lake belongs to you? Let me tell you something. This lake is managed by the HOA, and as president I make the decisions. Not you, not the county, not anyone else. Her voice carried across the clearing, growing louder with every word. Neighbors who had been walking their dogs or strolling by now stopped, pretending to tie shoelaces or adjust leashes. Their eyes fixed on the scene, whispers already spreading. Karen's words fed on the attention, her volume rising like fuel to her fire. Do you know how many freeloaders like you try to sneak in here? Thinking they can use what we work hard to maintain? You're nothing but a trespasser. And I won't let you disrespect this community. The man lifted his eyes slowly, his voice soft, almost gentle. I'm not trespassing, I told you already. I have a legal pass, issued by the county. Karen scoffed, her laugh sharp and mocking. A pass? Please, don't insult me. I've lived here for 15 years. I've seen every rule, every paper, every person who belongs, and you are not one of them. Show me this so-called pass. Let me see what kind of fake you're carrying around. The man stayed silent, his jaw tight, his hand brushing against his wallet but not pulling it out. Not yet. He knew her type. No piece of proof would satisfy her until the moment it mattered most. Karen leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. What's the matter? Don't have it on you? Figures, you're just another liar, thinking you can push your way in and take what doesn't belong to you. The man's calm gaze didn't waver, but inside, his patience thinned. Still he held steady, letting her rant, letting her words spill out like poison. Because every word she spoke only built the moment higher, only raised the stakes. Karen turned to the small group of neighbors now gathering at the edge of the path, her hands spreading wide as though she were addressing a crowd. You see. This is exactly what I've been warning about. Strangers coming in, breaking our rules, disrespecting our space, and when I stand up for us, I'm the bad guy. But I won't let this man steal what we've worked for, not today. Some neighbors nodded quietly, too afraid to speak, others shifted uncomfortably. Their eyes darting between her and the man. Karen basked in the attention, her voice growing shriller. When the police arrive, we'll see what kind of pass you claim to have. And I guarantee you, it won't save you, because this is HOA property, and I am the law here. Her last words rang out like a gavel strike, her face flushed, her breath heavy. She stood tall, convinced of her victory. The man bent down slowly, setting his fishing rod against the tackle box, his calmness deliberate, his movements measured. He looked at her quietly, his voice steady. You're wrong. Karen's eyes widened slightly, her lips curling into a smile. Wrong? We'll see who's wrong when the police get here, and they drag you out in front of everyone. Then maybe you'll learn that rules aren't suggestions. They're orders, and in this community, my word is final. The man didn't reply. He only turned his gaze back toward the lake for a moment. The water calm, the ripples moving gently, his silence both infuriating and unsettling. Karen's smirk wavered for just a second, then she crossed her arms, tapping her foot loudly, filling the silence with her restless energy. The neighbors whispered louder now, some pulling out their phones to record. The tension thicker than the summer air. The man stood quietly, waiting, the sound of distant sirens faint in the wind, growing closer with every second. Karen's head lifted proudly, her voice rising again. Hear that? That's the sound of your little fishing trip ending, and my rules winning. Hope you're ready for some embarrassment. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice low, controlled. I'm ready. And with that, he straightened his back, the card still tucked safely in his wallet. The truth waiting like a blade hidden in its sheath. The moment building higher, the silence growing heavier, the stage set for what would come next. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the quiet streets that surrounded the lake, the sound bouncing against the trees and the still water. Neighbors shifted uneasily, some stepping back while others pressed closer, their phones raised, their whispers sharp with curiosity. Karen stood taller now, her arms crossed, her smirk wide. She turned her head toward the gravel path just as the patrol car appeared, rolling slowly into view, the lights flashing red and blue against the green of the trees. The man stood motionless, his tackle box still at his feet, his fishing rod leaning against it. His eyes calm but steady. Karen's voice rose above the murmurs. Finally, now we'll see this trespasser get what he deserves. The car pulled up near the clearing, its tires crunching over gravel. 2 officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their expressions serious, one tall with sharp eyes, the other younger but firm. Their gaze went first to Karen, who waved them over urgently like she was calling old friends. Officers, thank God you're here. This man has been trespassing on our lake. He refused to leave, he's breaking our HOA rules. Her voice was shrill with practiced outrage. The taller officer looked at her, then at the man, who still hadn't moved. The officer's tone was neutral. Sir, we got a call about trespassing. Do you have identification? Karen stepped closer to them quickly, speaking before the man could. Don't bother asking him, he's lying. He claims he has some kind of pass. But I know everyone here, he's not one of us. He's trying to sneak in and take advantage of our community property. The younger officer raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-rant, his voice calm but firm. Let us handle this. Karen's mouth opened in protest but she closed it again, her eyes darting to the man, daring him to speak. The taller officer turned his gaze back to him, his eyes sharp but professional. Sir, can you step away from your things and tell us your name? The man bent down slowly, placing his hands on his tackle box, moving it slightly aside, then straightened, his voice steady. My name is Daniel, I'm here to fish, and I have a county-issued pass that allows me to use this lake. Karen let out a laugh so loud it startled even a few of the neighbors. There it is again. The fake pass story. He's wasting your time, officers, he's wasting everyone's time. But the officers didn't laugh. Their faces remained unreadable. The taller one asked again, do you have this pass with you? Daniel nodded calmly. Yes, I do. His hand brushed lightly against his wallet in his back pocket. But he didn't take it out just yet. He could feel the eyes of everyone on him, the neighbors, the officers, and most of all Karen, who stood just feet away, her face red, her voice sharp. Don't let him fool you, officers. These people always come up with fake documents. It's not real. I'm telling you, it's not real. Her words cut through the air like jagged glass. But they also betrayed her. Nervousness, her voice rising too high, her arms waving too fast. The taller officer glanced at her again, his brows furrowing slightly. Then he looked back at Daniel. Why don't you go ahead and show us the pass, sir? Daniel gave a small nod but still did not rush. He wanted the moment to stretch. He wanted Karen's smirk to grow just enough that it would hurt when it broke. The crowd shifted closer now, a few people whispering. Does he really have it? Could he be telling the truth? Phones were raised higher, recording every second. Karen turned to the crowd, her voice pitched like a performance. You'll see, all of you. When the officers take him away, you'll see I was right. The younger officer stepped slightly to the side, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes careful, as though he was measuring both Daniel's calmness and Karen's hostility. The taller officer spoke again. Sir, please, let's see the pass. Daniel took a deep breath, his hand sliding into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the smooth plastic of the laminated card. But he didn't pull it out yet. Instead he looked directly at Karen, his voice quiet but clear. You're very sure of yourself, aren't you? Karen's chin shot up, her smirk wide. Of course I am, because I'm never wrong about who belongs here and who doesn't. And you, sir, don't belong. Daniel's lips curved faintly, not into a smile, but something sharper, something patient. We'll see. The sirens had gone quiet, the flashing lights still reflecting across the lake. The air felt heavier, The moment stretched thinner, everyone waiting. Everyone holding their breath for the reveal that hadn't yet come. Karen stood trembling with self-righteous energy, convinced of her victory. The officers stood steady, waiting for proof. The neighbors leaned closer, their phones recording. The man's hand hovered near his wallet. The truth resting just inches away, silent but ready. Like a blade about to be unsheathed, Karen stood with her arms folded tight across her chest. Her chin lifted high like a queen standing in her court. The flashing red and blue lights behind her seemed to crown her in her own mind. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she looked from the officers to the crowd, then back to the man who stood calmly by his fishing gear. She mistook his silence for defeat, his patience for weakness, and she fed on it. Her voice ringing sharp and loud across the lake. "Officers, I've told you exactly what's happening. This man is a trespasser, a rule breaker, and I won't allow him to disrespect this community any longer." She pointed at Daniel like he was an animal caught where he didn't belong, her words echoing off the trees. "He refuses to leave, refuses to admit what he's doing is wrong, and now you're here to do what needs to be done." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some neighbors nodded out of fear, not loyalty. Others whispered to each other nervously. Their phones still recording, Karen straightened her shoulders and stepped closer to the officers, her voice lowering slightly as though confiding in them. "You have to understand. I've been president of this HOA for years. I know who belongs here. I know who doesn't, and this man has no right to be here, no right to touch that water, no right to even stand on this shore." Her confidence grew with every word, her smile widening as she mistook the officer's silence for agreement. She turned suddenly, her voice booming again toward the neighbors. "Do you all see? This is why rules exist. This is why the HOA protects you. Because without us, strangers like him will sneak in and ruin what we've built." A few nervous claps sounded weakly from the back, but most of the crowd stayed silent, watching, waiting. Karen didn't notice their hesitation, her ego too loud in her own ears. She took another step toward Daniel, her finger stabbing the air. "Look at him, he doesn't even argue, doesn't even try to defend himself. Because he knows I'm right, he knows he doesn't belong here. That's why he hides behind lies about some pass, some fake piece of paper he probably printed at home." Her laugh was sharp, cruel, slicing through the tense air. Daniel stayed still, his expression calm, his eyes steady. His silence infuriated her. She mistook it for weakness again, feeding her arrogance further. She smirked at him. "You've embarrassed yourself enough already, and when the officers put you in their car, you'll wish you had listened when I told you to leave. But some people just don't learn until it's too late." The taller officer glanced at Daniel, then back at Karen, his brow furrowed slightly. But Karen took no notice. She was already turning to the younger officer, her tone shifting to one of false sweetness. "You'll see, officer, I've handled dozens of these situations. I know exactly how to deal with people who think they can cheat the system. Once you escort him out, this place will be safe again." Daniel finally moved, just a small step forward, his hands relaxed at his sides, his voice low but carrying clearly across the silence. "You seem very sure of yourself." Karen's smirk widened, her voice dripping with victory. "Of course I'm sure, because I know the rules, I make the rules, and you, sir, don't have a single thing that can change that." Daniel's gaze didn't waver, his voice still calm. "We'll see." The neighbors shifted again, sensing something under the surface, a tension building stronger than Karen's shouting. The officers stood still, watching closely, their faces no longer as neutral as before. Karen, blinded by her own confidence, didn't notice. She raised her chin again, her voice ringing across the clearing. "Go ahead, show them your little card, show them your fake pass, it won't matter, because no piece of paper can outmatch my authority." She spread her arms wide as though declaring herself the victor, the queen of the lake, the ruler of the rules, her confidence boiling over into arrogance so thick that even the crowd began to stir uncomfortably. Daniel breathed in slowly, his hand brushing against his wallet once more, the truth resting inside. The moment almost ready, Karen laughed again, loud and harsh, her voice shaking the silence. "Come on then, prove me wrong if you dare." The crowd held its breath, phones raised higher, the stage set, the arrogance peaking, and the fall waiting just one heartbeat away. The air around the lake had turned heavy, like the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Neighbors stood frozen in place, their whispers dying into silence as eyes locked on the man and Karen. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol car painted the water in streaks of color. The sound of insects in the trees faded. Even the wind seemed to pause. Karen stood tall with her arms crossed. Her lips twisted into a satisfied smirk. She thought the fight was already won. She thought her voice, her confidence, her position as HOA president was more powerful than anything this man could bring. She turned her head slightly, addressing the officers again, her tone loud and commanding. You see, officers, this is what I've been dealing with, stubborn trespassers who think they can outsmart the system. But I don't let them win. I stand up for this lake, for this community, because that's what leadership means. The taller officer said nothing, his eyes calm but sharp. The younger officer shifted slightly, his gaze moving between Karen's blazing arrogance and the man's steady silence. Karen's smirk grew wider, mistaking their silence for agreement. She turned to the crowd, her arms spreading wide. And all of you should be grateful I'm here, protecting what's ours, because without me people like him would come here every day, fishing, swimming, ruining everything we've worked so hard to preserve. Some neighbors lowered their eyes, uncomfortable, others raised their phones higher. The man stood still near his tackle box, his expression calm, his breathing slow, the storm of Karen's words washing over him but not moving him. His silence was louder than her shouting, and it began to unsettle even those who thought she was right. Karen pointed at him again, her voice sharp as broken glass. Look at him, not even defending himself, because he knows I'm right. He knows he has nothing, he's stalling, wasting our time. And when the officers finally escort him out, maybe he'll learn that rules are rules, and I'm the one who enforces them. Daniel bent down slowly, picking up his fishing rod, not to cast it, not to use it, but to place it carefully inside the tackle box, closing it with a quiet snap. Then he straightened, his hands empty, his back straight, his eyes steady. He looked at Karen without flinching, his voice soft but carrying. You talk too much. Karen blinked, her smirk faltering for just a second before she laughed bitterly, her voice cutting through the silence. Oh, that's all you have to say? That's your defense? That I talk too much? Please, officers, can we end this charade already? But the officers did not move. They were watching him now, not her, waiting, curious, sensing something in his calm that didn't fit the role of a guilty trespasser. The crowd leaned closer, phones raised higher. The man reached slowly into his back pocket, his fingers brushing against the smooth edge of the laminated card. He didn't pull it out yet. Instead he held it there, letting the suspense rise, letting Karen's arrogance swell just a little more. She laughed again, her voice shrill. Go on then, pull out your little fake card, your fake proof. Let's end this joke once and for all. Daniel tilted his head slightly, his voice low but firm. Are you sure you want me to? Karen's smirk widened, her voice dripping with scorn. Of course, because when you do, everyone will see what I've been saying all along. You don't belong here. You never did, and you never will. Daniel's eyes narrowed just slightly, his hand still resting in his pocket. The crowd's whispers grew louder again, tension thick like rope pulled too tight. The younger officer shifted again, his voice calm but curious. Sir, if you have something to show us, this would be the time. Daniel nodded. Slowly, but still didn't reveal it. His eyes locked on Karen's. You're very confident, aren't you? Karen's voice was like a whip. Confidence comes from being right, and I am always right. Daniel's lips moved into the faintest shadow of a smile. We'll see, Karen scoffed, folding her arms tighter, her whole body radiating arrogance. The crowd held its collective breath. The officers waited, and in the stillness of that moment, the stage was set, the calm before the storm, the silence before the reveal that would change everything. The clearing by the lake felt like a courtroom, the crowd of neighbors the silent jury, the officers the waiting judges, and Karen the loud prosecutor certain of her victory. The man stood calm in the center of it all, his hand resting inside his pocket where the truth waited. Karen tapped her foot against the gravel, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. Well? What are you waiting for? Show us this magical pass of yours. Let everyone see how fake it looks. Her laugh was sharp, cruel, spilling into the still air. The neighbors shifted uneasily, some glancing at each other, sensing something Karen didn't, something in the man's stillness that didn't match her confidence. The taller officer finally spoke, his voice steady but serious. Sir, if you truly have a pass, now is the time to show it. Daniel drew a slow breath, his movements deliberate as he pulled his wallet from his pocket. Karen's eyes lit up with triumph, her smirk wider than ever. She whispered loud enough for the crowd to hear. Here it comes, the little piece of plastic he printed at home. Daniel flipped open the wallet, sliding out the small laminated card, holding it between his fingers. The card caught the sunlight. The county seal glinting, the embossed lettering clear, the expiration date still years away. He stepped forward and handed it directly to the taller officer. The clearing fell silent. Every breath held, every phone raised higher. Karen tilted her head, her smirk ready, waiting for the officers to laugh and confirm her victory. The taller officer studied the card, his brow furrowing, his eyes moving carefully over the seal, the signature, the registration number. The younger officer leaned in, reading over his shoulder. The silence stretched longer, too long for Karen's comfort. She shifted her weight, her smirk faltering slightly. Well? Tell everyone it's fake. Tell him to pack up and leave. The taller officer didn't respond, his eyes narrowing as he pulled out a small device from his belt pouch. A scanner for county-issued passes. He slid the card under the light. A soft beep filled the silence, followed by a green glow on the screen. Valid. The device read, the word clear and undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers sharp and quick. It's real, it's valid. Karen's face froze, her eyes widening, her smirk collapsing into disbelief. She stepped forward quickly, her voice high. No, that can't be right. Run it again. The machine must be broken. But the younger officer shook his head slowly, his voice calm but firm. The pass is legitimate, issued by the county office, fully valid for this lake. He handed the card back to Daniel with a small nod of respect. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came, her arrogance cracking under the weight of truth. Daniel slipped the card back into his wallet, his movements calm, steady, his voice quiet but carrying. I told you I had a pass. The crowd stirred louder now, phones capturing every second, some neighbors smiling faintly, others shaking their heads at Karen's humiliation. Karen tried again, her voice shrill, desperate. He must have tricked someone at the county, bribed them. This isn't right. I'm the president. I decide who uses the lake, not some piece of paper. The taller officer turned his eyes on her, his tone firm. You may be president of the HOA, but your authority doesn't override county-issued rights. This man is allowed here. The words struck like a hammer, final and undeniable. Karen staggered back a step, her arms dropping, her face pale but flushed with anger, her voice shaking. This isn't over. Daniel simply looked at her, his eyes calm, his voice steady as stone. It already is. The crowd erupted in murmurs. The silence broken by the sharp sound of truth revealed the legal pass. Shining brighter than any of Karen's words, the power she held slipping through her hands like sand, and for the first time, she stood not as the ruler of the lake, but as the fool who thought she could outshout the law. The word valid still echoed in the air like a thunderclap. The green light on the scanner a glow that burned Karen more than fire. The neighbors gasped, some covering their mouths, others whispering quickly, it's real. He actually had it. She was wrong. Phones recorded every second, zooming in on Karen's red face, her smirk completely gone. Her jaw tight as she tried to think of something to say, her mind scrambling. She had been so sure, so loud, so proud, and now in front of everyone her authority crumbled. She pointed a trembling finger at the man. Her voice sharp but breaking. No, this doesn't prove anything. He could have stolen it. He could have tricked the system. He doesn't belong here, not in my community. The taller officer's eyes narrowed, his tone stern. The pass is legal, county-issued, verified on the system. There is no trick here. He has every right to be at this lake. The younger officer nodded in agreement, his voice calm but firm. And your call wasted our time. We came here for a trespasser, but all we found was a man exercising his rights. The crowd reacted loudly now, murmurs turning into open voices. She lied. She tried to embarrass him. She wasted police time again. Karen's face twisted, her arms flailing as she tried to defend herself. No, you don't understand. I was protecting the lake, protecting the community. That's my job as HOA president. Her words sounded weaker now, more desperate than commanding. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady, clear, sharp in its calmness. Protecting the community doesn't mean bullying people. It doesn't mean calling the police on someone who has every right to be here. It means respecting the truth. And the truth is, I belong here as much as anyone else. Gasps rippled again. The neighbors turned their eyes from him to her, their judgment clear. Karen stammered, her voice trembling. You think you've humiliated me. But the HOA still makes the rules, and I will find a way to stop you. But her words sounded hollow, her tone more like a threat. She didn't believe herself. The officers didn't flinch. The younger one even stepped slightly forward, his eyes sharp. Let me remind you, misusing emergency services for personal disputes can carry consequences. If this continues, we will file a report. Karen froze, her face pale now, her arrogance cracking completely under the weight of that warning. The neighbors whispered louder, their phones raised higher, recording not just the man but also her downfall. One older neighbor whispered to another. Finally, someone stood up to her. Another chuckled softly. She always thought she owned the lake, but look at her now. Karen's body shook with fury, her hands clenching into fists. But she could do nothing, every path of power closed, every word exposed. Daniel's calm presence stood taller than her shouting ever could. He bent down, picking up his fishing rod again, placing it neatly across his lap as he sat at the edge of the dock. His movements slow, peaceful, as though she wasn't even worth his energy anymore. That insult cut her deeper than anything else, his calmness, his refusal to even argue, his choice to simply continue fishing like she was invisible. Karen's breath came in sharp bursts, her chest rising and falling fast, her voice low but full of venom. This isn't over. But the words fell flat, swallowed by the sound of water rippling and the murmurs of neighbors who no longer feared her. She had shouted, accused, mocked, and called the police. But in the end, she was the one exposed, standing small in front of the very crowd she once controlled, the shock of it settling over her like a heavy shadow. And in that moment, Karen wasn't the ruler of the lake, she was the fool of the story. The silence that followed Karen's broken words was heavy, like the air itself refused to carry her voice any longer. The crowd that once feared her now shifted, their eyes sharp, their whispers no longer cautious but open, bold. Neighbors who had once lowered their heads when Karen spoke now lifted their chins, their voices stronger. She wasted police time again. One man muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Always picking on people just because she thinks she owns everything. Another woman added, shaking her head. Karen turned quickly, her eyes darting to the crowd, her lips trembling. No, you don't understand. I was only protecting you, protecting the community. But no one clapped, no one nodded, no one believed. Her words fell flat like stones into the lake. Daniel sat quietly at the edge of the dock, his fishing rod balanced across his lap, his calmness like a shield that made her look smaller with every passing second. The officers still stood by the patrol car, their faces stern, their presence making the crowd braver. One older neighbor finally stepped forward, his voice steady though his hands shook slightly. Enough, Karen, you've bullied us long enough, and now everyone can see what you really are. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the people. That's right. Always calling the cops on someone. Always making rules no one voted for. Their words grew louder, bolder. Karen's eyes widened as she realized the shift. The power she had held for years slipping like sand through her fingers. She pointed at Daniel again, her voice shrill, desperate. He doesn't belong here. He doesn't live in this community. He doesn't pay dues. But her voice cracked halfway, her throat tight with fear. Daniel finally lifted his head, his eyes locking on hers, his voice calm but cutting. I don't need to live here. I don't need to pay your HOA. I don't need your permission. Because the law is stronger than your rules, and the law says I have the right to be here. Gasps filled the clearing, the crowd buzzing, phones recording every word. Karen staggered back a step, her lips parting in disbelief. Daniel's voice stayed steady, unshaken. You can shout, you can threaten, you can call the police 100 times, but it won't change the truth. You don't own this lake, and you never did. Cheers broke out in the back of the crowd, clapping hands, voices rising, neighbors who had once been silent now bold, shouting, that's right. Finally someone said it. She doesn't own anything. Karen spun around, her eyes wide, her face red. Stop it, all of you. I'm the president, you have to listen to me. But her words were drowned by the crowd's growing voices, the power of truth spreading faster than her lies. The officers stepped closer now, the taller one's voice strong. I think it's clear enough. This man has every right to be here, and your behavior today is unacceptable. Karen's jaw dropped, her hands trembling as she stammered. You can't talk to me like that, I'm in charge here. But the officer shook his head slowly, his eyes cold, You're not in charge of the law, and the law says he stays. Those words cut deeper than anything, the final nail in her crumbling authority. The crowd clapped louder, some laughing, others recording. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. Her face drained of color. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice low but strong enough to carry. The tables have turned, Karen, and the truth is not on your side. His words landed heavy, the neighbors cheering again. The lake once ruled by Karen's threats now filled with voices of freedom. The balance shifted, and for the first time, Karen stood alone. Powerless, humiliated. Surrounded not by followers but by witnesses to her fall, Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting from the officers to the crowd, her hands shaking as she tried to hold on to the last threads of control. But the crowd had changed. They were no longer silent, no longer afraid of her sharp voice and endless threats. Their whispers grew into open voices, their voices into shouts. You always lied to us, one neighbor called out, his voice firm. You made rules just to scare us. Another added quickly. You fined me for hanging laundry when no such rule even existed. A woman shouted from the back, her voice trembling with years of frustration. You embarrassed my husband at a meeting, made him feel small, and now look at you, everyone can see the truth. The words hit Karen like stones, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing but no defense coming. Every lie, every act of control she had used for years now turned against her. Daniel stayed seated on the dock, his fishing rod in his hands, his calmness louder than her screaming had ever been. The officers stood firm, their eyes watching carefully, not at him, but at her, and the crowd pressed closer, their phones raised, their voices sharp. One younger man shouted. You told me I couldn't park in front of my own house, that it was against the rules, but you parked your SUV there the very next day. Another woman yelled. You charged us fees for things that never even existed, like lake maintenance. But we all know you pocketed the money. Karen's body trembled, her face red, her words spilling in a rush. No, you're twisting it. I was protecting you. I was keeping this place safe. I was doing my duty. But the crowd only grew louder, stronger, united now in their anger. You weren't protecting us. You were controlling us. You were stealing from us. You don't own us. The chants rose, the weight of truth crushing her arrogance, her power collapsing like a broken wall. The taller officer finally stepped forward, his voice stern, cutting through the noise. Enough. The people have spoken. The law has spoken. And the evidence is clear. This man has every right to be here. And your actions today were not only false but harmful. Karen staggered back, her lips trembling. I was only trying to help. Her voice small now, no longer a weapon, just a weak excuse. The neighbors laughed bitterly, not with humor but with relief, years of fear dissolving into freedom. Daniel lifted his head slightly, his voice calm, steady. This was never about protecting the lake, Karen. It was about you, about power, about control. But now everyone sees the truth. The crowd erupted in cheers, some clapping, some whistling, their energy washing over the clearing like a wave. Karen turned in circles, looking at the faces that once lowered their eyes at her commands, now staring back bold, defiant, free, her kingdom gone, her lies exposed, her authority shattered. She shouted one last time, her voice breaking, "You'll regret this, all of you." But her words carried no weight. They were swallowed by the sound of cheers, of laughter, of voices that no longer feared her. She stormed off down the path, her sandals slapping the gravel, her shoulders stiff, her face burning with humiliation. The cameras followed her, recording her retreat, recording her downfall, and as she disappeared into the trees, the crowd turned back to Daniel, their faces filled with gratitude, their voices rising in unison. Thank you. Finally someone stood up to her. You showed us she's nothing without lies. Daniel simply nodded, lowering his eyes back to the water, casting his line quietly into the lake, as if to remind them all that this was never about pride or victory, it was about truth, and the truth had finally exposed her. The lake was quiet again, the chaos of earlier fading into whispers that drifted through the neighborhood like smoke after a fire. Daniel sat calmly on the dock, his fishing rod in his hands, the line stretching into the still water. The crowd lingered behind him, not in fear anymore but in relief, their voices softer now, filled with a strange mixture of shock and freedom. For years they had lived under Karen's rules, her threats, her voice that never seemed to stop, but now they had seen her stumble, seen her stripped of her power, and something in them had changed. They stood taller, their eyes brighter, their words braver. One older man with gray hair stepped forward, his voice trembling but strong. "You gave us courage today. You showed us we don't have to bow to her anymore," a woman with a young child added quickly. "She made our lives miserable, but you reminded us the law is bigger than her rules." Daniel looked at them briefly. His voice low and steady. "I only showed the truth, nothing more," his words simple, but they carried weight, more powerful than any long speech. The officers packed their gear quietly, the taller one giving Daniel a nod of respect before returning to the car. The younger one paused for a moment, his voice quiet but firm. "If she bothers you again, you know where to find us." Daniel nodded, his calmness never breaking. The patrol car rolled away slowly, its lights fading into the distance, leaving only the quiet of the evening. The neighbors stayed a little longer, some clapping softly, others shaking his hand or patting his shoulder. One by one they drifted away, back to their homes, their whispers spreading through the community, retelling the story, making sure everyone knew what had happened. Karen's name now spoken not with fear but with scorn, not with respect but with laughter. She had been exposed, and the story would travel faster than she could silence it. Daniel stayed by the lake until the sun dipped low, the sky painted with orange and gold, the water glowing like fire. He reeled in his line slowly, packed his rod and tackle box neatly, and stood up, taking one last look across the calm water, his voice quiet but firm, spoken more to the wind than to anyone else. "Rules mean nothing without truth, and truth always wins." The words hung in the air, carried by the breeze across the water, echoing through the trees. A final word that sealed the moment. When he walked back up the path, the neighbors who had stayed behind parted for him, their faces full of respect, their fear of Karen gone, replaced by courage they hadn't known they carried. And though Karen would surely try again, though she would shout and threaten and cling to the last shreds of her authority, the community would never see her the same way again. Because one man had stood calm against her storm, one man had shown proof when she only had words, and one man had reminded them all that no voice, no title, no false authority was greater than the truth. The lake shimmered quietly behind him as he walked away, no longer a battlefield, no longer Karen's weapon, but a place of peace again, free at last from her grip, the story of her humiliation already etched into the memory of everyone who had seen it, and the lesson clear: truth had the final word.